Good afternoon. Yeah, welcome to the session, The States of Mistakes. We are half through the week of Berlinale Talents 2019. The motto of this year's Talents program is Mistakes, How to Fail Better. And it's my pleasure to welcome first Ben Gibson on stage, the director of the DFFB, the film school here in Berlin. Please warm welcome to Ben Gibson.
Thank you. Does the mic work? Is this one on? Yes. Good afternoon. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes talking to you about the person that you're going to meet. It's partly rock and roll. Of course, we should bring people on very slowly, one after another, but just because there's a few things to say. Some of you will know James Schamus, and some of you will have been to sessions with James before. But for those of you who haven't, this is a great pleasure for me. It's incredibly, I think, now, it's a very easy job, because James is such a clear thinker and speaker that I'm just going to sit here and be the straight man for the whole of the session. So I'm just going to find a comfortable seat and sit and not say anything. It may be a mistake, and I'm expecting some surprises from him, so I could be wrong about that. I went in 1989 to New York City when James and I were both in the production business. I was rather a junior learner, I think, at the time. I went to his office, which was in what's called the meatpacking district, which is a sort of a former industrial district, and there was a refrigeration unit with a big refrigerator door, and I think above, or maybe across the street, was the Communist Party of America, and then with the meat trucks moving around, and it was the office where Good Machine had come. There was a company before called Apparatus, which published a book that you could get as a photocopy. It says how to make a very low-budget film in New York. And I'd used that because I wasn't really a producer. I was just a distributor who was trying to produce films. So I'd used this, although it was all about prices in New York, to think about how you make films. And I went in, and when I went in, the guy from the Canon photocopier company was in there. And he was saying, look, you need your photocopy serviced. And he said to James, look, why don't you get a longer contract? Keep coming round here. It costs you more money per week to have this contract. And then James said, yeah, that's an interesting point, but I need to tell you about what the cycle of finance is in independent film production. And then the photocopier guy sat down, and then James explained to him how money works in independent film production, and how, on balance, it's best to have a short contract for a photocopy machine. So this is the moral of this story, is that James is a person who makes everyone in the independent film business understand how to enjoy their contradictions. So he's the most professorial person who's ever run a division of a major American studio, Universal Focus. It's not just that they haven't written books about Carl Theodor Dreyer. They've never heard of Carl Theodor Dreyer at all within the industrial world where this guy is hanging out. And at the same time in academia, where he's continued consistently to teach at Columbia University Film Department, which has the most amazing faculty in the world. They can't imagine that there's somebody so commercial in there thinking about the industry who's also a professor talking about theory. So he's walking this line in a very beautiful way. You will know his work. I must have asked him for some career advice, and I'm quite resentful today, because I've just realized that he didn't give me any good stuff, because my career hasn't gone really quite so well. But I'm just going to read a few things about his. So, Good Machine, Ted Hope, who many people know of, Anthony Bregman, who was working as an intern there in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. Universal Focus, which was the first sort of classics division that made sense because it was about Spanish language cinema, it was about real cinema, it wasn't about New York Times bestseller adaptations, which even so was closed down because suddenly classics divisions became less groovy. The writer of The Ice Storm, all of these films that he made with Ang Lee, where he was very often the writer or the co-writer. So he won a Palme d'Or in Cannes for the screenplay of The Ice Storm. Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Meanwhile, working extraordinarily in these international markets as somebody running a production division. And most annoyingly of all, in 2016, there are very few producers who do a good debut as directors, and we all say, well, it was a bit vain of them, but what the hell, when we come out of the film. And then, of course, with James, he made a wonderful film, which was very annoying. And he'd been hanging around with Todd Haynes and Paul Schrader and Raul Ruiz and Vincent Perez and all these people. And so he adapted this Philip Roth book and made a film called Indignation, which got amazing reviews. Nobody wrote about how, although he was really a producer, it wasn't too bad. It actually just was a great movie. And there were very few people. There's people like Alan Pakula, who made Clute, and Ann Turner. And there's about 3 people who are producers turned directors who've got reviews like this. So I'm not going to say more because I'm going to take up the whole session doing a big valedictory of somebody who's just sitting behind that curtain. So would you please welcome James Schamus?
Good evening, good afternoon. Ben, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you to the whole Talents team for having me here. And thank you all again for coming. Yeah. So, Berlinale Talents 2019. Mistakes. How to fail better. So that's our theme. As you will soon discover, the folks who run the Berlinale Talents program have themselves made a big mistake by inviting me, and you've made a big mistake by attending to this talk. But before I fail and bitterly disappoint you all, I am going to guarantee you that you are going to get what you actually came here for, what I assume you actually came here for, which of course is great career advice, right? That's really what Berlinale Talents is all about in these presentations. And in fact, I've made a deal with Florian and Christina that the Berlinale Talents will provide 100% money-back guarantee that you will get this advice today. And I'm going even further than that. I'm going to make sure that you get this advice right now, so that later on, when you feel like walking out, which is fine, you'll understand why I say that later, you will have still been completely satisfied with why you came. And the way I'm going to do this, the way I've guaranteed to myself that I can guarantee to you that you will get this advice, is that I am not going to give it. I've asked Ben Gibson to prepare the greatest advice, career advice he's ever heard, received, or given. I have not even heard it myself yet, because I wanted to be myself satisfied with today's session. Ben, please come up again.
Yes, sir. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, James has asked me for one piece of career advice. As I just said, I didn't get very much, which affected my career. But the one thing I'd say is that I was trying to work this out. There's a producer who's not with us anymore, who's a totally brilliant producer, who's a kind of mentor to me, called Michael Waring, who worked in the BBC and made a series called Boyce and Black Stuff and lots of wonderful films at the BBC. And I found myself bullshitting my way through producing a film with him, which was called Fellow Traveller, that we did for the BFI and HBO and the BBC. And on the first day, we sat in the office, and I said, look, I have a confession to make, Michael. I don't know anything about producing films. What do I need to know? And he said to me, don't think of it that way. All you need to do is to know people who know more than you do, and then look after them. Because if you try and know things, that's too slow. But if you know people who know other things, you might be able to find an answer reasonably quickly. And that's the only good career advice I ever had.
Okay. Well, look. Thank you so much. And that is indeed the greatest career advice you will ever hear. It's also the absolutely worst advice you could ever hear. It's terrible. I mean, I did take a risk asking you to do that without vetting it, but that's tragically bad advice, and now we understand where your career went and why. But I'm not going to waste our time arguing with you about it now. I think what we'll do is wait for the Q&A and come back. By the way, he's had a great career. You can stop it. Sorry. It was a great introduction, though. Thank you again for that. Okay, so let's just move on to the lecture. Or rather, I'm not going to do a lecture. I think I'm going to do an executive summary because I know that all of us here are busy professionals, even those of you in the audience who, and most of you are, I believe, at the beginnings of your careers. So I wanted to keep this brief because I know there's going to be a networking happy hour in the lobby afterwards, right, for the talents, right? So we want to get to that. A little more important. So I'm just going to do an executive summary and get this over with pretty quickly. And it's all about, obviously, this year's theme at the Berlinale, mistakes. Okay, so here comes our executive summary. We'll do this quickly. If you don't risk making mistakes, you'll never have the chance to succeed, blah, 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 blah. That time I took a big risk and failed, and everybody said I was an idiot, blah, 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 blah. Then I took another risk and I succeeded, so who's laughing now, you idiots, blah, blah, blah. Right, we're almost to the end, don't worry. Blah, blah, I made a mistake once, but I learned from that mistake, and then I became really super successful, blah, blah, blah. So there must be some causal relationship between my superhuman capacity for failure and blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, anecdote about famous person I bonded with as we both laughed about our mistakes. And now we're so famous on this panel together. So, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, the phrase failing upward really must mean something because otherwise, why would I be up here lecturing to you, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. So thank you. Thank you, Berlinale Talents. Ben, you have been a great moderator. You've been an amazing audience. And I think we have time for one question. And that question is, so why? And I really mean it. Like, what are we really doing here? Why? Why? Why mistakes? Why failing? What's this all about? So in order to answer that question, we do need to take a step back and ponder just what kinds of mistakes and what kinds of failures and what kinds of lessons from those mistakes and failures are allowed into this discussion on this stage under the theme of failure and mistakes. And what kind of mistakes, failures, and lessons are by the very structure of this event right now, kept silently and invisibly out of the discussion. We need to ask if the very structure of our experience together here in Berlin right now is itself a kind of massive failure, of a sort even more massive by the fact that it's invisible and silent. In short, as I will now try to prove to you and show you, the content of the advice you get here at the Berlinale Talents Conference, and by that I mean all of the content, is meaningless, empty, and false, compared to the terrible truth of the form and the framing that that advice takes in this context. So We can get a feel for that framing in the title of today's talk, The State or States of Mistakes. Now, I just want to set the record straight. I did not come up with that title. It was predetermined by the organizers for this slot, and I have a sneaking suspicion somebody really famous dropped out of the schedule, so I'm simply filling in, but that's cool. I'm okay with that. Your luck. When I was told I was stuck with the title because the program had already gone to print, I was actually a little embarrassed because I didn't actually understand what it meant, right? But then I started to think about it, and I really got to like it. So, you know. I started to think, why the word state? What does state have to do with mistake? And at first I thought it was some weird issue of translation, right? Was it like der Staat, der Stand, or, you know, l'état, l'état d'âme? Just I started thinking, like, associating, you know. And then I thought, oh, der Stand der Dinge, which of course is the great 1983 Wim Wenders movie, all about failed filmmaking, actually, and the relationship of film art to commerce, der Stand der Dinge, the state of things. So I thought, okay, you know, the association thing is really working for me. I'm going to keep going on this. So a whole host of other associations arrived about the state, and thus about governability, the governing of ourselves, of our sensibilities, and you know, you come across this book, L'état d'âme, right, the state of the soul, and this purportedly instructs you to savoir, descendre en soi, you know, enter into yourself, reach in, accept your various states of mind, nurture them in order to change your entire life, and thus guide you a bit more to get to more happiness, wisdom, and serenité. So obviously something I'm not about to do for you today, but anyhow, that's another approach to this whole mistake and state thing, right? So governing, the state, a state, managing yourself, the relationship between governing yourself and the state. Well, how to manage or govern this topic without, of course, oneself becoming a kind of failed state oneself. And the first thing to grapple with amidst all of these associations is that this injunction to fail better, this imperative our culture seems to repeat constantly, this incessant insistence that we must all, as model or prospective entrepreneurs, fail if we are to succeed, all of this exhortation to failure is in fact intimately related to the purposeful failure of states, to the current structural neoliberal void in both political and self-governance, as states and selves become ever increasingly fragile matrices of ever increasingly hyper-speculative capital flows in what the New York Times, that ultimate voice of liberal capitalism, calls in its celebration of risk and innovation, the failure age. So I propose that it is this very idea of mistakes that is the mistake, because it reconfigures the experience of mistakes and failure along only one possible pathway, a pathway that reduces life and meaning to either career success or failure, that is, to an individual as opposed to a shared or collective experience. So how does it do it? How does it do this trick? Well, let's see, here's a mistake. That's a mistake. Now, here's a failure. 2 + 2 = 5, but it's on a final examination or in your elementary school mathematics competition on stage or whatever, right? You make a mistake on a problem, but you fail a test, right? The difference? Of course, you can get all the problems on a test wrong, but you only fail a test if someone else is grading the test, right? So for example, many of us applying to college have taken many so-called practice tests, right? On which you get all, and look, you could do a practice test on which you get all the answers wrong. It's still not a test you failed because it didn't count, right? In other words, it's possible to make mistakes 100% of the time on a test and not fail because, for example, you're just taking the test to learn for yourself about your own placement or level or proficiency. In the sense, the test could actually be considered a success, even if it's made up only of mistakes. It just helps you situate where you are with your knowledge and your proficiency. But that is not the sense in which the exhortation to fail better is made here at the Berlinale Talents. In fact, not only are your mistakes supposed to count in order for them to count, you must also admit to experiencing the pain of a kind of public humiliation at the failure those mistakes have entailed. For example, I could take a quiz on my phone right now on my Duolingo language learning app, which I am currently and completely pathetically using to try to learn Spanish. But instead of Spanish, I could take a quiz in some other language I know nothing about and I'm not interested in acquiring. I would fail the test, but I really wouldn't care. Why should I? I'm not studying the language, and I'd hardly be ashamed about my score on that test. The organizers and fellow speakers at Berlinale Talents would thus hardly have any reason to applaud and encourage my failure, even though I would have decisively failed the quiz. No, the organizers and speakers don't want me to make mistakes and to fail. They want me to be pained and humiliated as publicly and horribly as possible. And then they want to reassure me that this is perfectly okay because they themselves are successful people who have empathy for me in my experience of humiliation and failure. They have this empathy and the wisdom on which that empathy is founded, they tell me, because they themselves have suffered also. But here's the problem. They can only speak to me empathetically. I can only speak to you empathetically because they and I have suffered in the past. They, I, cannot be suffering in the present, nor can they or I claim to want to suffer again in the future in order for them and me to exercise our deep humanity and care for you as you embark on your own humiliating and painful career adventures. And what is even worse is that the only position that they and I can claim the authority and wisdom from which to validly give you the advice you will need to manage emotionally, financially, and otherwise, all this supposedly necessary pain and humiliation, is the position of success. It is thus, oddly, a political and social requirement for successful people today, the ruling class, to perform their narratives of failure, to advertise proudly the enormity of their failings, because this paradoxically gives them the position of authority from which they only their supposedly empathetic voices can continue to count from stages such as this one. For example, here's an article, an image from an article from the LinkedIn website about an enormous failure. Howard Schultz, the billionaire CEO of Starbucks, who, by the way, for those of you not following the news in the United States, has just announced that he will be spending hundreds of millions of his own dollars running as an independent candidate for the presidency of the United States. So our potential next president is, as LinkedIn tells us, a profile in failure. You see, he's a failure. He's the very profile of failure. But of course, this is the key to his success. And see here, he even goes to Harvard Business School with his advice learned from his life of failure. He kept going by reinventing and pivoting and innovating and overcoming all of these profound moments of failure. So, okay. There's only one problem with the lessons we can learn from Howard Schultz and others like him, though. And that is that it's actually impossible to learn anything from this guy. Because while Howard Schultz has continuously failed, so have billions of other people. They just haven't taken in and hoarded billions of dollars. They're just earning maybe $2 or $3 a day. But these billions of people are never asked to come to Harvard Business School or to the Berlinale Talent stage to give inspiring lectures. You see, we know they have learned nothing useful from their failure because, well, they failed. So obviously, we should never listen to them. But that actually, when you think about it, literally makes no sense. Indeed, wouldn't it have been interesting if the organizers of the Berlinale Talents had invited to speak at the conference only people who just continuously made horrible mistakes, repeatedly and always failed. For example, they could have convened panel after panel for you of, say, really bad film directors who made terrible movies. No one wanted to see them. They spent years trying to make their second one. Maybe they even succeeded at that, which was even worse. Until finally, after rejection and rejection and rejection, they gave up and became full-time Uber drivers or teachers or insurance salespeople or doctors or lawyers or agents. Yeah. I wonder if some of them are happier now, or bitter but still funny and observant, or kinder than they used to be when they thought they were going to be the next Steven Spielberg or whatever. Who knows what they would have to say and what we could learn from them. But such panels will never be convened because they would be made up of people who actually failed. And so the very structure of false knowledge and advice removes them from our sight and hearing. This also means that the people who are called upon to address you are by definition, whether or not they want to be, assholes. Because there can be absolutely no substantive content to the advice they give you besides the simple fact of their success. And there is nothing about their so-called failures that makes them better or more interesting humans per se. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter whether it was they or some actual miserable failure giving the lecture. Since if the lessons or morals came from the failure, anyone who failed, whether they were successful or not, could share the experience that we could learn from. So for example, there is no reason why one couldn't give a lecture here on this topic with the following main points about mistakes and failing better. So I will now give you some points, some advice points about mistakes and failing better. And this would be logically perfectly reasonable lecture here at Berlinale Talents. 1, if you make a mistake, make sure to immediately hide the fact from other people and destroy all evidence of your mistake. Advice number 2, if you can't completely hide the mistake, make sure to successfully blame someone else for it. Sounds good. I'm really getting into this. I'm just leaning in so hard to this lecture now. 3, if that's not possible, blame the person who uncovered your mistake for the mistake of making the mistake known to other people and thus hurting the company or team or enterprise or whatever, right? That person clearly made a much bigger mistake than you did and they must be removed or eliminated. 4, then, after a safe amount of time has passed, humbly admit that once upon a time you made a mistake but have learned an incredible amount from your mistake. Indeed, you have learned more from your mistakes than all the other idiots you beat out on your path to success, and you now have the authority to be a beloved figure imparting your wisdom to a new generation of careerists. In short, if you want to fail better, you should be a gigantic fucking asshole like Howard Schultz. So, I was really feeding that applause, let me tell you. I was just like, come on. For as John Patrick Lay points out in his recent book, a book called Keywords, The New Language of Capitalism, and I quote, the celebration of failure, instead of vindicating the underdog, is another way of venerating the winners. Now at this point, you might be thinking, wait, this Schamus guy actually wasn't kidding. He really is kind of an asshole. And obviously he's been somewhat successful, at least up until a couple of years ago, but I'm still hanging in there. So they wouldn't have invited him up here to talk and give us advice unless, well, he had some advice to give, but he's not giving us advice. He's just being an asshole, but obviously not as successful an asshole as Howard Schultz, Point taken. But while I have your ear and you're still here, we'll break it down even further. Most of you in the audience have yet to succeed. That's why you're sitting here listening to me. And given the odds, many of you may never succeed. Indeed, some of you will probably succeed once, and then maybe just stop succeeding for the rest of your lives after that, which is really kind of worse than not succeeding at all. It's so depressing. Anyhow, yeah, really sorry. Just saying. So, but imagine, I mean, just take for a moment, imagine what a huge condescending asshole I would be, and any other speaker would be, if we actually acknowledged that fact, but then gave consoling words of advice and wisdom to you about things like career is not everything, family, the best things in life are free, successful people are really so busy, they don't really, they're empty, hollow shells of that, blah, blah, and family, blah, blah, blah. But since, again, the sole precondition for us speaking to you is that we, quote, succeeded, we can only pretend not to be complete assholes if we pretend that all of you, if you heed our advice, will actually become successful, which is obviously a total crock of shit. But if we don't pretend that, we're even bigger assholes because we get to tell you like you might not succeed and blah, blah, blah. So it's really a paradox. It's a conundrum. It gets worse. Because the only way to pretend that the whole setup is not one gigantic lie is to limit every standard of meaning and value we glean from experience, even together, in terms of this one thing, and that is career. So think of it this way. Just ask the question, why should you learn from your mistakes? So let me return to my attempts to learn Spanish on my phone with my app. When I make a mistake, the app simply repeats the question until I get it right. I learn by getting it right, not by making a mistake, although of course the repetition of the question probably helps me learn. And all this seems really reasonable to me. But here I am learning a specific skill or content, something that actually has content. In this case, how to speak Spanish. And I could learn other things like the craft of shoemaking or knitting, through apprenticeship and patient practice and study. And in learning such things, I also learned that there is a right way and a wrong way to make shoes or roll cigars or fix car engines. Even as a master of that craft, I begin to clear space for creation, invention, design, new methods. But if I were learning to be a car mechanic, I don't think anyone would encourage me to learn from my mistakes. For example, by sending someone out to drive a car whose engine will blow up because I tried some stupid fix and it failed. Sure, I would learn a lot when the people driving the car crashed and were burnt alive. But no one holds conferences where junior car mechanics get days of inspiring lectures about learning from their stupid mistakes and blowing people up. But here I'm supposed to give you such a lecture because, in fact, there is, I will continue to insist, absolutely no positive content to anything I could say that fills the function of the inspiring advice I am supposedly here to give you, except to perform a kind of structural assholishness that in and of itself is meant to teach you a lesson. Now, we're going to get to it. What is that lesson? What is the lesson? That lesson is meant to make you believe, without ever actually consciously questioning the validity of that belief, that your état d'âme, the state of your soul, is fundamentally linked to your so-called creative career, and that your career is fundamentally a function of aligning your own sense of self to the satisfaction of and pleasure of audiences who consume the narrative films and television shows you wish to make. The pleasure of other humans in the consumption of audiovisual narratives is the ground of the painful pleasure you are urged to feel from the humiliating lessons you will experience as you fail repeatedly in satisfying those consumers. In other words, the lesson is that there is no lesson unless it is inscribed within a narrative of your career, and your career is either a success or failure, depending on the value attached to the pleasure you inflict on consumers. What's truly odd about all this is that while you are being directed from the stage to anticipate and fulfill the desires of others, you are told, again from the stage, repeatedly, that in order to do that, you have to be bold, you have to follow your gut, you have to be original and take risks, you have to not follow the herd or listen to the naysayers who tell you that what you're doing won't work. You have to break the rules, blah, 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 and actually ignore everyone else and do only what you want or feel you need to do because you believe that you are the creative leader and others will follow once you show them what they want, even though they didn't know they want it until they saw the trailer for your movie. In other words, you have to be a sociopath. But we all know there's no correlation between any of these sociopathic attributes and the talents that would result in the actual accomplishment of bold, original, and successful creative work. Just as many idiots, bores, and failed hustlers have these sociopathic attributes, as do artistic geniuses. They just produce mindless dreck. And it turns out that some artistic geniuses are actually considerate people who are capable of listening to others and paying attention to their opinions. But none of that matters. What matters is putting into place a form of career assholishness where actual content and craft might go. And what is also amazing, besides the fact that I've had the slide up for like 10 minutes, it's like, why not? What's also amazing is that the content of so much cinema and television imagines, reproduces, models, and exemplifies this seeming paradox at the heart of capitalist cultural bureaucratic domination by giving us stories of precisely such rebels, cowboys, disruptors, outsiders, etc., 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 who all manage to succeed against the odds, or at least they look sexy and heroic even when failing, even to the point of dying tragically. In fact, as you will soon see, the only true artistic career success the system wants you to imagine that is allowed for you is, in fact, dying tragically, which is another way of dying meaningfully or dying successfully. So true artistic success is always falsely presented to you and imagined as a kind of failure. And the only way to be an ultimate insider, Howard Schultz and the rest of us tell you, is to be a rebellious, cowboy-like outsider. Of course, this is all, again, utter bullshit, and we all know it. But can you imagine, just for a moment, imagine what the reception would be like today if I delivered a lecture to you advising you of the exact opposite. That is, to at all costs avoid making mistakes, do everything in your power to conform and not rebel. Rather, you should listen to those who know more than you do and obey their commands and advice. If I gave that speech, you would most likely boo or laugh me off the stage, right? I mean, like, come on, can you imagine somebody giving that speech here? Yeah, Ben can. Yeah, it's starting to sound good, you know, the DFFB, that's how it should be. Yeah, okay. But here's the joke, and this is the joke. In extolling the virtues of so-called failure and bold risk-taking and outsiderness, that's actually the speech I'm giving you. Because no matter how well-meaning and empowering I could be in delivering that message, I would only be delivering the essentially empty form of a vaguely but exceptionally effective structure of belief, one meant to instill in you a personal and personalized fear of failure, of your failure, not of our failure, not of our collective failure together as humans, for example, to save the planet or to provide the barest minimum care and attention to other humans around us, within or at the borders of our failing states. In other words, my role here on the stage today is to instill in you, in a sense, to instate in you, a form of governmentality and a project of self-governmentality conditioned by what we might call anxiety capitalism. Because at the end of the day, the production of what we currently call culture requires a cadre of recruits, such as yourselves, who must fail, who must be made to love their failure, to value their failure, even as they are anxiously aware that the only lesson to be learned from their mistakes is through the spectacle of someone else's success, which is really no lesson at all. And it is thus the display of such success that we can now understand to be the ultimate mistake. This injunction, thus, to incorporate failure into the timeline of a creative career highlights the paradoxical and anxiety-producing dilemma at the heart of capitalist creative economies. It forces the creative human subject into a temporality in relation to other humans that is utterly at odds with itself and with them. Because to be an authentic creative artist always means to situate oneself completely at a specific moment in time in the zeitgeist, right? I'm me now. While to be a successful creative artist means to always have the ability to anticipate what people want before they know they want it. You must satisfy a demand or a desire before the public actually knows it has the desire for what you are providing them. Otherwise, you are not an original artist. You're just an imitator and a hack, right? So, you are authentic in the moment, which immediately becomes yesterday, but you are successful tomorrow. You must be in your moment in a completely natural and unarticulated way, but you must calculate, as all capitalism does, the return on investment of your genius at some other moment in the future, when everyone else discovers what a genius you, by the time they discover you, once were. You see this most clearly in the world of music, where bold and original styles immediately timestamp themselves. So the more authentic and true to oneself the musical artist is, as even the briefest amount of time goes by, the more quickly outmoded and dated they are, right? We've all had that weird sense, right? Spotify. So, and I'm just going to pause. I didn't write it in here, but there was a study done by the Recording Institute of America, the recording arts, the kind of record company business a while ago, and they found out that most Americans listen to music, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, that they were listening to when they were 24.9 years old, which roughly correlates with probably when they were having the most sex. And that's it. Like, that's the most authentic, that's it. And then it's just like, they, whatever. To kind of understand how this works, let's take the most recent remake of A Star is Born. It was a film I enjoyed, so just saying. So because we're going to go heavy like ideology critique here, I just want to make sure that's on the on the one hand, it's a remake, right? So we've already seen it before, so theoretically we already know we desire it. At the same time, it has to be new and different, otherwise we wouldn't want it. We'd consider it an unoriginal imitation. So the film imagines this dilemma along, as usual, totally gendered lines, right? The authentic artist, the dude, sings heartfelt rock and roll, inflected with like country, southern folk roots, right? So he thus must, of course, die a tragic death because the world which once celebrated his disruptive, rebellious cowboy outsiderness has clearly moved on. To be authentic means to already announce in your very originality and authenticity your soon-to-be deadness, right? Meanwhile, the girl has success precisely because she sells out like from the very first second with all those ridiculous dance routines and empty fake pop gestures that are figured as what are predictive of what is now and contemporary, right? Swiftly and brutally manufactured by the male executives who produce the product that she instantly and tragically, or sadly, not tragically, becomes. Indeed, even in her original and authentic pre-stardom state, she is essentially a human lip-sync machine. Her femininity is a kind of paradoxically authentic drag performance, and her eventual success is foreordained by the fact that all the queer drag performers at the bar she toils at hail her as one of their own. At the end, of course, she performs her authentic self as a form of mourning over the now dead guy. For the only authenticity allowed by the system comes from the tears that flow when acknowledging the death of the genuine artistry the successful but fake creative careerist has inadvertently killed off through her success and stardom. Well, actually, the real star that is born in the movie, as the global entertainment press excitedly reported, and an impossible because truly inhuman model for genuine career success that still maintains its authentic, natural believability and presence, is the character who mediates and binds the relationship between the past genius of the already soon-to-be-dead guy and the future-facing desire machine of the hyper-choreographed living girl. That is, of course, the character of Charlie, the dog. So we might call Charlie the ultimate service dog for capitalist culture anxiety. I know, it's like, I really should go back to the Howard Schultz thing. For Charlie is both perfectly and mechanically trained. He uncannily hits his marks exactly and fixes his soulful gaze directly at every point it needs to attend in the movie. I mean, it's like unbelievable. It's like the best trained dog ever. And it's Bradley Cooper's own dog. Like my dogs, I mean, my God, the amount of crap I am still cleaning up off the bathroom floor. This is like the perfect dog, it's like amazing, so well trained. So anyhow, so he's that, so he's totally trained, but at the same time, he's utterly natural, like he's a dog. So whereas creative, anxious humans can only be natural in their past, right, authentic and natural in the past, but they must be totally trained and choreographed towards their future and success-oriented present. Able to resolve this impossible contradiction only by performing grief and loss, that is, by celebrating their own creative emptiness. So where does this leave you, my audience today, here in Berlin, poised as you are at the beginnings of, we hope, your soon-to-be successful careers? Well, if I have succeeded with my talk today, I hope you all now, in conclusion, join me in committing, as soon as possible, career suicide. I don't have any particular advice for you about how to do that, but I would think your first step in this process might be to join or to form a labor union, and your second step would be to organize yourself and your fellow creative workers, or even go on strike. And if neither of those things appeals to you, you can, of course, contemplate simply burning the motherfucker down. Personally, I'd start with the union thing, because workers don't need to imagine having careers in order to gain and wield control over their creative power. What they do need is solidarity. They need each other and to be there for each other. And while, of course, in the most banal and prosaic ways, they and all of us must learn from their mistakes and failures, workers have much more to learn from their successes and victories. Because the question is not whether your conception of yourself as a unique and individual artist is compatible with your status as a laborer. It is how we ever got fooled into thinking that great art was ever anything but great labor. So we can agree now that we will stop taking Howard Schultz's and my and Ben's advice, and stop trying to be failures in the way that Howard Schultz pretends to be, but really wants you to be. Rather, how about we band together to make sure, and soon, that Howard Schultz and all the other billionaires like him themselves get a taste of real failure. Now, that would be a failure worth celebrating. Thank you for hearing me out.
Okay, thank you very much, James. You've repositioned us entirely. I mean, although I'm supposed to be the, adversary here who's got all the pat advice, in a way I would go even further, and I do all the time, because I think that where you're starting is you're talking about people who are artists and creative people and how they think of their own identity. I am me, I do my work, it comes from me, and not seeing that they live in a kind of very decadent moment of high romanticism where there's a hell of a lot of fiction there, where the notion of originality tells you that really you don't understand that every text is the rewriting of another text, and you use the mirror to see who you are rather than being with another person who tells you who you are. And all of those things which are dangerous bits of romanticism all go with this for me, because you actually have to get to the point of saying, because you're still using the terminology of saying, well, who are you and what do you want to do? But the you in that, if we start to commodify identity and say, oh, I know, I'd like to be like Vincent van Gogh, because he was kind of tortured, then there's that problem there, which is that actually, I think creative work is allowing other people to discover who you are, mainly. Yeah. So that's just a comment, that's not a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and a comment back. When did the old dudes start wearing these socks? It's like we're really in some weird competition.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
It just happens.
Suddenly, you've got these pastel ones.
Like the old. Suddenly, the old guys are just like wearing weird socks. But here we are. Very aggressive of us. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's certainly part of the legacy we're trying to manage, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going to just like chat in this fireside way, which would be awful. So I'm going to just throw it out immediately and get some. Yes.
I did insult I did totally insult you at the beginning of the talk here about his advice.
Oh yes,
right?
you did. Yeah.
Because it was terrible advice.
Yeah.
And the advice was find people who know what they're doing, and you kind of chase them down and make sure they're working with. This is
rubbish.
This is actually a good example. Like, no, that's the greatest advice, yes, and it's the worst, because what you need to be doing at the beginning of your career is chasing down all the other people who may not know everything, but who have the spark and the collegiality and the solidarity and the view of the world that will enrich you. Together, you can rise together. So the putz who's running around chasing after all the successful people who know what they're doing already and trying to like line up and get a gig that is working with them is forgetting about all the other people in this room that they're sitting with who don't have those skills. So you really need to be, I'd say, working and of course failing together. So it's the exact opposite advice is actually the world's greatest career advice, right? The opposite. And my point is, this is the point, I have a point, that the weird thing about the structure of these events and the structure of even how this supposed knowledge is committed to language is that it's committed to language in a form, that is to say the form of advice, which is totally true, and its total opposite is also true. Well, a statement, the opposite of which is completely true, is obviously, there's something wrong there with it, because it's empty, it's nothing, right? So
yes,
it's like only work with the best people. No! Only work with the people who are going to be the best.
No, you're paraphrasing me too much.
I know, but that's the point.
But still, I mean, I still see. I mean, but James, people want to they want to meet somebody whose attitude to the world they want to experience, and that's what we've done in the last hour. And that comes in a number of ways, and it's all sententious garbage, we know, but then which sententious garbage they choose reflects something about them, right?
Yeah, no, and I'm trying to be as big an asshole as I can, because it's the only way to kind of break that structure. And here's the bet. I will bet you, if everybody here just takes 1 minute, close your eyes and go, everybody here, because you've gone to so many panels, like how many people have been to like more than 5, 10, 20 panels, talks in their lives, or 100, right? So you've gone to a lot of these already. You must have heard amazing advice at one of them. So if you think about what it is the best advice you ever heard, and try to prove me wrong. Just try. That's all I'm saying. So anybody from the floor, if you want to give me the best advice that is just, it just exists, I'm here to accept it, and I will humbly take it, right? I will humbly
take it. That's a very good call. Has somebody got a microphone out there, so it's moving around with a mic? Yeah, there we are.
But you can ask any question. By the way, we can...
But you can ask any question, but tell us what the best piece of advice you have is, because he'll do what he did to me, but,
No, I won't. You might win.
Well, one of the things that you said, you're talking about here is how important failure is. And the reason why failure is so important is because success is so important, right, in our culture. And I guess the question that I have, or the advice that I have, is why should success even be the goal?
Right.
What if success were not your goal?
Then you'd be living in a cardboard box under a bridge. Or you would be, I mean, that's kind of what my talk was,
I mean,
right?
success doesn't necessarily mean advertising and capitalism. You could have your own version of success. So it is a kind of inherently positive thing, right?
But a success, I think, is always a moving target. And tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that no matter how successful one is, they always feel that they have not been successful enough, unless they are a sociopath,
I
like
can
you
tell
said.
you, it is so lonely at the top. Oh, my God. I am just filled with a yearning of just utter, no, look, I mean, my whole talk was like kind of saying, I can't answer that question without sounding like a jerk. That's the point. There is no answer to that kind of language because it's already encoded in what I think is a terrible way of looking at the world. It doesn't mean that I'm against being successful. Like, I really I've enjoyed, like, are you kidding? People like the movie and they pay me and, oh my God, that's great. But that is, just that frame is so, it's insane when you step back from it, right?
But James, I mean, the exchange of stories which are not the stories in those horrible paperbacks in the airport about how to be successful in business and all of that, right? There are other things which are counter to that because they're supposed to make you think about the fact there's an ideology. I mean, I talk a lot in my job about specialization, and I say, well, look, look at the television, look at the way in which everybody who's 7, who's living in a working class household all over the world is supposed to be able to do fantastic soul singing and specialize and do only that night and day so that they succeed because they've specialized in a thing that they're good at. And then look at the news and you find that it's a class trick because the news is read out by somebody with a degree in ancient Etruscan history who's never been to a journalism college except to give out a prize because they learn how to learn. They don't specialize because they're in the fucking aristocracy and they run the world, for instance. So now it's only a story. It might be that specialization in lots of contexts is very good, but the narrative which is against the ideological push sometimes is valuable.
Yeah. And you should all be studying Etruscan history. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Which is not chosen at random because Einstein used to teach Etruscan art.
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody? There. Just,
wherever.
just there. You've got a yellow jacket on.
If they raise their hand, that's fantastic.
So you said to say the best piece of advice, but I think your whole speech, it was kind of brilliantly wise, while at the same time I think full of a lot of self-irony, or a bit of banter between the two of you. I hope that you're friends.
We were.
Yeah, things are changing.
So I think I'm going to say the advice after the question, and the question ties into your speech, which is in the juxtaposition or the oxymoron of making mistakes is the success, or something along these lines. What is then your greatest mistake, which in turn was your greatest success?
Oh, wow. That would require me to self-reflect, which clearly I'm incapable of.
Well, that's what we paid for, James.
Exactly, damn, okay.
I'll just hum a bit while he thinks.
I would say, look, I'll just give a recent example, because I often, what I say, taking the analogy from American football, is I'm often stumbling into the end zone. I just happen to hold the ball and I kind of trip over and I fall in, and then suddenly everybody's like, yay, and I'm like, oh, well, that was cool. But we had the world premiere of a film by a first-time filmmaker named Rhys Ernst just last week in Sundance. It was not accepted here at Berlin, but it was a huge, massive success. at Sundance, and it will be later. That happens, by the way. That people often will not get what you're doing, and that. But it was an amazing experience to be with this film and with this young filmmaker. It's a film that takes place in the trans community, and Reese is a young trans man. And we had developed the film, I and my partners had developed the film for a couple of years. And we had first attached an amazing young director who was queer and non-binary, but was not trans, and who would have made an amazing version of the film. Like, it would have been great. But that person, there was a scheduling conflict, and they had to fall off the film. And then we had to find another director, and we found Reese. And I realized that there's, so we kind of stumbled into that. When we first were developing the film a few years ago, there were just not that many trans directors even coming with short films that we could convince our financiers to finance the film with. It was a very, and then 2 years later, when the other director fell out, suddenly there were all these amazing, maybe it was our fault that we weren't looking hard enough before, but here he was, and he just did an incredible job. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful, loving, kind, funny, soon to be sold for huge amounts of money movie, I hope. We would have made a film, a movie about the trans experience with in this environment right now, that probably people would have said, why did you do that, So it was all just a series of accidents and mistakes, but that got us to the finish line. And that's happened a fair number of times in my career.
The name of the movie?
Oh, it's called Adam.
Adam.
Yeah. Cool. All right, and your advice?
Yes, what's your advice?
I mean, it's kind of almost on the screen here, but it's something along the lines of fail often, fail forward. So I guess you guys touched on that. You did a whole speech on it, really.
Yeah, but so here's my question. After my speech, I'm just saying, fail often, fail forward. How do you know you're going to fail forward? How do you, if you knew that you were failing forward when you were failing, why would you go to the trouble of failing? Why wouldn't you just get it forward?
I mean, I guess it's a lot of effort to wake up in the morning and consciously fail.
But the problem is also that people say, oh, I'm going to make a film which is absolutely exceptional like that, and it's going to succeed like that one. When we were in the UK, and when they just made the full Monty, there were the number of producers around saying, oh, what we're going to do is do something that crossover into America about some low-budget film in Sheffield, which is going to make us all rich and famous. And I said, well, no, actually somebody did that last year. And there is that problem about it, which is that if you... yes, you see what are the restrictions and what's the contradiction, but everyone's story about a failure is, oh, well, everyone thought this was going to happen, but that happened. So then the problem is that that's what you call the exception that proves the rule. So it means there's a rule, which is, generally speaking, don't do that.
Yeah, I'll just try one more time. Just say you're in a really intense romantic relationship with somebody, and every morning you wake up in bed together, and you stretch and you say, today, I'm going to consciously fail as your romantic and life partner in the most spectacular way. But I promise I will fail forward. Yeah, I'm just saying.
So there, I told you, if you give him advice, he'll give you advice.
No, keep coming, man.
So let's get some more, though.
I am more than humbly willing to accept that I can't turn any of that. I mean, if I can't turn it around, you win. I buy you a beer. Hands. There were hands. Oh yeah. Here's a brave person down here.
He's being modest already.
Hi, James. Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. Do you have a definition of success or a definition of failure? That doesn't require an hour of speaking?
Right. Well, first of all, is there a way that I could possibly answer a question without going on too long? No. No, and I think that probably, again, I wish I did, but I do think there's a kind of, Wittgenstein language game where we can congregate certain kinds of associations along the lines of winning or losing, success or fail, but they herd us into mentalities that precisely, I think, keep us from understanding why, when we attach those narratives to ourselves, we're really doing a tremendous disservice to the possibility that we could have as artists and also as workers to bind together and do something together. So I'm going to fight off that question, if you don't mind. Any advice?
Just do it.
Just do it. Okay.
I made that up myself. Yeah.
You did, really? Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I want to say about success and failure is that it is exactly a thing that's worth thinking about when you say, well, what if we all did this for the next few hours and said, what's success for you? Then people would be coming up with things which are about their parents loving them and other people loving them. And it would also be about being respected by people that they'd never met at all, and all of this. And these things are entirely commodifiable. So the thing about having identity politics in terms of diversity is incredible value to it. But then if it's all high romanticism that we're buying something and calling it ourselves, right, then those kind of words are the most dangerous ones.
Yeah, but I would love to be able to have a commodified version of my mother's love, but that's a whole other discussion. Yes.
Well, we say something in the DFP on the first day, which is a little bit controversial, but it's something I say to them, and they just arrive on the first day and they say, well, look, your mother is absolutely correct. There is absolutely no one like you. And the way that you and your mother discuss it is the best thing in the world, and so that's why we're not going to compete with that at all. We're just going to do some fucking work.
Okay. So just do it. Honestly, the worst advice you could ever get. I mean, this is
Second
the
worst. I thought
hard.
Ben's was pretty bad.
What's that? Yeah.
Ben's was pretty bad.
Yeah,
I beat everyone.
But
yeah.
I think yours is worse because can you imagine, like, telling somebody who didn't know how to, like, fly a plane, like, just do it. I just like, no, don't just do it.
But filmmaking is not that dangerous, I guess, right?
You know, well, it can be in the wrong hands. But anyhow, you get my idea. But it's like, no, don't just do it. Learn something. I don't know. It's crazy. That seems insane. Anyhow, yes.
Someone over there. Yeah.
I'll quit right away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, James. So I'll try to be less funny, but try to offer something that our friend offered us. When Zizek wrote the book In Defense of Lost Causes, so maybe we have to think about failure as something totally different. And this is like the rebellion of Ghetto Varsha. They act and they know they're going to fail. Exactly. The Palestinian in Gaza that marching against Israeli soldiers that shoot them, they know they're going to fail. And maybe some radical artists can see their art like that, in defense of lost causes. Yeah. And then it's a whole different discussion about failure. That's an option.
More than an option. It's certainly, I mean, this is, if you haven't figured out, somebody I know. And yeah, I mean, the spirit of this talk is precisely that we need to reconfigure in a completely different way this idea. That's why this whole definition thing. But that's the reminder we need. That really, look, it goes back even to, a sense pre-Lacanian, even if you're into, say, existentialism, right? Being and nothingness. You're nothing. The only being comes from acting. That's what creates being. And regardless of failure or success, by the way, at least you're doing. So you are doing, you're just doing it, of course. But yeah, the recontextualization of this narrative is what we need right now.
But it's also this thing about meritocracy and capitalism. So, I think while you're talking, I'm thinking about the fact that, one of the pieces of advice I give, which I made up myself, and this is going to be knocked down as well, but I mean, what I say is, look, whenever you see a bad film, consider the fact, sit down and think about this bad film that you absolutely hate, which is garbage, which a lot of money was spent on this film, and think about the fact that you may be very talented and very clever, but it is obviously not the main thing, which is making this other person able to get this cash. So being clever may have absolutely nothing to do with whether you're going to succeed in capitalism, even the creative industry. So you have to think about both things.
James, thank you very much. Make me laugh a lot, but still I'm trying to get over my disappointment because at some point of your speech I thought you were really going to make a social criticism of the notion of success, or of our notion of the base of our notion of success. And now you're saying you did not, and you don't want to do that basic criticism of success. So I'm a bit disappointed, because this maybe romantic kind of way of seeing mistakes is also mine, because, you know, I grew up in Bolivia. I don't show it, but I did. And success didn't exist as a value there, really didn't. So everybody was failing around it. It was very nice to see that I could fail as much as I wanted without having to produce any success, you see.
So you're pro-success?
No, I'm very much against our definition of success, because I think that our successes are very much based on some kind of exploitation of other people's misery.
I think that's quite right, but I think that the other thing is you have to start from a basic point of view that if you want to move to the woods and, you know, not deal in the normal economy and have your own definition of success, then obviously you need plenty of money in the bank to do so. So existing in parallel with capitalism is a very contradictory space. And it's not something that, so it can be very difficult, because just like the kind of things that James was talking about, it can be just a kind of contradictory bullshit space where you say, well, I don't care about material things, but yet you have material things. It's what Thomas Piketty is getting on at. He's saying, okay, you could work your whole life, but actually you're not going to be wealthy because you didn't inherit anything. There are facts, and those are the facts of capitalism. So when you face them and you're hungry, then other kinds of ambitions have to be put in the real world of eating.
I think what you just said is very much in the logic of materialism that leads to success, and success, the very notion of success is a notion that bothers me, because it's very much capitalized by material success and some kind of intellectual success that can also be material, as you're talking a lot about money.
So, yeah.
I mean, sometimes as a joke and sometimes as seriously. But I mean not only these romantic aesthetic values, but also the lack, you know, the quality of life that comes from the lack of having to produce success. That's what I mean.
Oh, that's a great perspective. On the other hand, I would say this, that there is, look, I'm not, and Ben, I appreciate, but I'm not kind of elevating the discussion to the level of a kind of a structural denunciation of the capitalist system. I take that as granted, but then again, I also take, like, you know, working for a feudal lord in a pre-capitalist state was probably not that much fun either. You know, there's all these systems, and we live in these contradictory spaces, and I don't want to discourage people from creating and experiencing the joy of working together and creating together and achieving whatever the definition, either the joy of engagement and success, in failure. For example, most of the joy in my life probably comes through solidarity and comradeship in political spaces that are pretty, like, out there, like people are not winning, right? But the people who are actually struggling together are experiencing a kind of joy that's very different from the joy experienced backstage at the Oscars, right? But that's not to romanticize it either. I don't want to sit around and go, oh, we should just, stop worrying about success, and you know what I mean? I think that you have to be able to have the ability to hold these contradictions and explore them without being, a complete hypocrite, but, acknowledge that there is that structure to your life, your daily life. I mean, here you are in Berlin. This is part of your life, Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I know we had a hand right there.
Oh, my.
No, we actually have to.
I want to tell you.
Let's keep moving, though.
Ja,
if you don't mind, because.
Nein, ich soll doch noch etwas sagen über was ich ihm rate, my counsel.
Good. Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. No,
yes,
fangen wir an.
Okay.
It comes from my grandma. Nothing comes from nothing. Okay, I'm stopping.
Nothing comes from nothing.
Nothing comes from nothing. Wow. Okay. I mean, there is an entire school of Greek philosophy that proves that wrong, but I don't have time for that.
Yeah, Greek philosophy is tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock.
I mean, Aristotle, well, we won't go there. Anyhow, yeah.
So I just looked up one of the quotes that I really like, and I think it actually applies to failure and stories we actually tell ourselves. And I have another question, which is not really directed to the talk itself. It's a matter of an opinion piece rather than anything else. So the question is, the statement of authenticity is overrated.
Of what?
Authenticity is
Authenticity.
Authenticity is overrated, yeah.
is overrated. So your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, Ben has given a passionate attack on romantic ideologies of authenticity and how dangerous they are, especially for first-year film students who are all geniuses, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'll just be contrarian here. And I gave you the version of it, obviously, from A Star Is Born, right? We posit authenticity, but as a function of a system that is itself, quote, inauthentic. And what I would say here is, like, I just don't buy either side of it. Like, it's not like, I mean, my God, Lady Gaga, to me, she's like as authentic as anybody. I mean, like, I love Lady Gaga. Like, why is that authentic? Just because she's doing the choreography, right? But that's the system is pausing. Like, for her to be in that system, she has to be shown to be, like, super inauthentic, right? It just seems bizarre. So I just think that dialectic is a little false, right? I hope that came through in the thing.
Yeah. So generally, I believe that failure or success are not supposed to be perceived through like a monolens, because that's what our culture is doing. It's not a strict definition, and despite of what you want to get. And the advice I had, which could be relevant, is that originally comes from Chuck Palahniuk, and it says, "We're so in love with our pain, we don't want to leave it behind."
Yeah.
Same goes for failure stories we try to tell ourselves, and that's it.
So we're so in love with our pain, we don't try to. So the advice is, please leave your pain behind. Get over your love for your pain and leave it behind. That's terrible advice. I mean, it's just terrible. I mean, like, we probably all know somebody who at least presents or pretends that they've done that, and they're just narcissistic. They don't connect to anybody, right? I mean, if you don't have that pain present to you, then you really can't construct a relationship to the real world of other people living in pain, because you're just so happy, right?
But do you really have to carry it around with you?
I don't know where else you're going to put it. Terrible advice.
Okay, somebody else has some advice for us?
Not advice, no, because
Okay, yeah, this is a smart guy.
my advice is to not give any more advices.
Yeah, thanks.
Now-
The shtick can get a little old, don't worry.
First of all, thank you very much for an interesting talk about mistakes in general. Now, I was wondering if you have any advice for the next generation of producers of
I really thought he was, but no. Go ahead. No, thank you.
Because often I feel, or people can beat themselves up of mistakes they make, even though that mistake might not be a mistake.
Yeah.
In that sense, do you have any advice of mistakes we shouldn't think is a mistake?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll give you a fundamental experience. Now I'll go into anecdote, career mode. We're in the last couple minutes, so I can do that like, my career. So I'm on the set of Indignation as a director. And honestly, it's just like the greatest job being a director, can I just say? And because one of the things about it is that you turn your phone off. I mean, some directors don't, but they should. But your phone's off, and your whole day is spent interacting with all these different people and solving problems with them. And you're never here. You're always, and you have to pay attention. I mean, if you're not totally paying attention, you're not directing, right? And on the set was my producer, who actually started his career. You mentioned him, Anthony Bregman, who's one of the greatest young independent producers in the world now. And I brought him on to produce the film. And he had started with us as an unpaid intern at Good Machine 30 years ago. So you can imagine, he's a great producer. So I'm on the set, and I look over, and there's Anthony Bregman with his headphones on the phone, and he's like negotiating like the nudity rider for somebody, actress in some other movie, or the trucks are late, or the caterer needs to be changed, and he's like pacing around just like producing. It's so good. So I went up to him, and I said, he was got off the phone, I went up and said, Anthony, I said, you're just an incredible, wow, you are so smart. Like, I just want to say how what a brilliant person you are. And he goes, well, thank you, James. I said, just one question. If you're so smart, why are you producing? This is such a shitty job. Like, this is horrible crap you're dealing with all day long. I'm directing. This is amazing. And I often think, like, what the hell are we? Like, what? Like, I don't get it, you know? So I honestly, and I've just produced, we've had 3 world premieres, me and my colleagues, of wonderful movies in the last 3 weeks. We had 2 at Sundance and 1 here. And they were great experiences. But it's also, I look back and I'm like, why am I? And then, of course, I see the films and I have the experience of seeing, especially younger filmmakers, and crews also, just coming into their own, and I truly love it. On the other hand, I really am just like gonna get out. I just gotta no, I gotta stop. So the advice is very simple. If you are already producing, you're already stupid enough that no advice will help you.
But also, you have many reasons for doing it, but I think the important thing is not to decide what you want to do when you grow up until you're in the room and they're about to turn the machine off.
Yeah.
Because if you decide, I'm a producer, I don't need to be asked questions in the press conference. I just got my own thing. I'm not a director, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. That's all just taking all your energy away, telling lies to yourself about this whole business.
Oh, okay.
Do you agree?
I didn't quite follow the whole, not taking questions at the press conference.
Well, you know, that the whole thing is when you're a producer, you say, well, I'm a cinephile, I'm interested in having this impact and thinking about my relationship to cinema, being a curatorial person, thinking about all of that. And then you get to the press conference in Cannes, and then you just sit there and kind of play with the coffee spoon because you're the producer. So, I mean, it's not of any interest.
Yeah, but
that's my example.
No, but yeah, look, when you get your first film that you produced at Cannes, and the director and the writer and the stars are all having their picture taken and they're on there and you're not there, my advice is don't play with your spoon. You're going to be on your phone making your next movie. You don't care what, no, you shouldn't be up there. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. That's what you should be doing.
Yeah. I do think the producer should step back, by the way. I really do. I think it should be a thankless job. I really do. All this talk among my fellow producers, like, we don't get the respect and the recognition and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, because you're just the producer.
An easier life and more money. Yeah, true.
I'm just saying. Okay, I think we have time for one last question or not? One last?
Yeah, we are last question.
Up here. Hello.
Oh, up there, hello.
Oh,
Yes,
wow,
we haven't had,
thank you.
I'm sorry, we've been ignoring you up there. I apologize for
It's a
that.
whole new world.
Okay, yeah.
Hi.
Bring it.
Thank you, James. Very enlightening and very entertaining. And nasty.
Yeah. No. I'm trying to be kind. Go ahead.
I just want to ask, do you think that it has to do with fear of mistakes? Do you think if we were less afraid of making mistakes that we would fail better?
No. The whole point is to instill a more structural fear that you will always be living in a gig economy and that your self-worth is tied to the sense of anxiety that you must constantly be pushing out and failing and pushing out and failing. And that's the only way you'll ever succeed. Yeah. So it's so I really, from the heart, I hope not too nasty, pretty nice, just like I really hope that if anything came through today, it's that the anxiety, and I know this, I mean, young people starting these careers now, it's always been tough. 'Twas ever thus, especially in the creative industries. It's not an easy business, right? But there is now structurally instilled into the kind of finance capitalism that we live in, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, that is anxiety producing, especially in younger people, right? I mean, you're all dealing with, it's an epidemic. And you're not alone in that. And when people tell you, stand here and say, please fail and make mistakes, and it's not helping. It doesn't help. But, and so I just want to say, truly from the bottom of my heart, if you could fight that off and understand that there is solidarity in your anxiety, right? Everyone else is having this. As long as you can shift that frame and get out of that Howard Schultz, portrait and failure idea, there's a chance. You have a chance, and I certainly want you to have a chance, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's, in one way, a great point to end, but I have one thing in our last 30 seconds I want to ask James, because you've trashed all of our advice. And I want to ask you, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever been given by anyone?
Oh my God, oh my God.
You haven't got it?
I would
maybe
say,
it already came out in
I
this
would say this, yeah, maybe
conversation.
it came out, but I would say that watching, like at the beginning of my career, I noticed at early film markets and networking things and stuff like that, that a lot of my colleagues and peers were running around chasing after the famous or important or powerful people with their business cards, engaging them in conversation, explaining that they had a project and pitching and all that kind of stuff. And I realized for myself that what I needed to do was stand back and find the other people who were maybe not chasing all those people, who looked really interesting, even if they were broke and kind of not quite there and just kind of had an attitude. And I did decide to chase them. And I'm really glad I did, because that's how I met Christine Vachon and Todd Haynes and Tom Kalin and Ang Lee. I chased those people. And I refused, in a sense, to do that other chase.
Yeah.
And that's weirdly the most saccharine, straightforward, uncynical advice.
Yeah, that's like a good piece of advice. What was that lecture about? I mean, does anyone want their money back? I certainly don't.
Thank you so much. And Ben, thank you for being the straight man.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was
You're
great.
very kind.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We're also wearing the same shoes.